What if someone were whispering instructions that could change your life and few people listen? Imagine for a moment that, amid the noise of everyday life, comes a whisper as quiet as it is powerful, a call to conversion that comes not as a shout, but as a gentle invitation to transform your heart. Not long ago, an ordinary person I know decided to heed this call. In 7 days, she changed small routines, began to pray seriously again, and brought peace to a home that had been divided. It was as if a door had opened where before there had been only tension. Have you ever experienced this? Have you felt touched by something you can't explain? A restlessness that demands change? Stay with me until the end. What you discover now may surprise you. We call these inspirations echoes of conversion. Subtle signs, discreet requests that work within people and ultimately transform families and communities. At the heart of this movement are the messages of Medjugorje, and in this video, we'll delve into the 7 unrevealed messages that, though little known, carry a spiritual weight capable of reorienting lives. This isn't just a distant prophecy, it's a practical call, renewed prayer, fasting that liberates, silence that allows us to hear God, care for our families, and a series of concrete attitudes that produce visible fruit when put into practice. You may have heard of signs and visions, of warnings that sound like omens, but what many people don't know is that behind these signs lies a pastoral invitation, a proposal for daily conversion. These unrevealed messages from Medjugorje are not just mysterious words, they are guidance. For those who want to build a spiritual refuge in the midst of tribulation, for those seeking peace as the world seems to accelerate toward chaos. And the beauty of it all is that transformation doesn't require grand, one-time heroic acts. It requires simple, repeated steps, aligned with prayer and practice. Throughout this video, I'll show how each of these messages acts like a small ray of light illuminating a part of our hearts. Some touch us deeply, awakening repentance. Others nurture relationships, inviting reconciliation. And still others ask us to engage in concrete practices like digital fasting and home blessings. Practical ways to create spiritual protection. You'll see real examples, accessible suggestions, and clear signs that these practices are working. Greater peace at home. Unexpected reconciliations, a sense of calm amid life's storms. But be careful. This isn't about fueling panic or following superficial interpretations. Discernment is essential. Therefore, we'll also talk about how to evaluate signs, how to avoid exaggeration, and who to turn to for reliable guidance. Here, authority comes not from sensationalist conjecture, but from the visible fruit and experiences of those who have allowed themselves to listen and act. If you feel restless, hungry for meaning, or simply curious, this video is for you. At the end of this journey, you'll have a practical roadmap, a 7-day challenge. You can start today, and tools to help you transform restlessness into concrete action. But before we move on to this step-by-step plan, we need to understand the roots of this secret calling, where these messages come from, why they've been kept hidden, and, most importantly, why they can so profoundly shape hearts. Now, get ready. In the next parts, we'll open the first chapter of this divine whisper, explore the first 3 messages, and discover simple actions you can start taking today. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what resonated most with you. Share your experience, a question, or even a small sign you've noticed in your life. Reading what you share helps me understand what else needs explaining, and above all, creates a community of people who are preparing together. If you're feeling something similar to this inner restlessness, give us a like. It's a simple gesture that shows this type of content matters and allows more curious hearts to find these messages. And if you want to continue this journey, subscribe to the channel. When you subscribe, it's not just another number. It's a silent commitment to your own transformation and to the mission of spreading a little more peace and discernment amidst the noise. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. And each comment, each like, and each subscription empowers us to bring testimonials, practical guidance, and analysis that truly help. Now, back to what matters. Let's open the first of the 3 messages and see how a small act of faith can start to change everything, and I want you to follow along step by step. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Since the first reports emerged in the early 1980s in a village called Medjugorje, something curious has been happening behind the scenes of faith. A small group of people began receiving messages that gradually spread like echoes, not thunderous rumbles, but whispers that reached hearts seeking transformation. These communications, described by the visionaries themselves as requests for prayer, conversion, and peace, became known to many, but not all their nuances reached the general public. That's why we speak here of unrevealed messages. This doesn't mean they're secret out of malice, but rather that some guidance and developments have remained hidden for various reasons, sometimes out of pastoral prudence, sometimes because they're still being experienced and examined by local communities. Spirituality experts and pilgrims have noticed a pattern. These aren't just spectacular phenomena, but an ongoing process of spiritual fruition that produces concrete fruits in people's lives. in the community's mindset, and in the daily decisions that shape destinies. When we observe the accounts closely, we realize that many of the changes attributed to these messages are not dramatic, like an instantaneous intervention, but subtle and cumulative, like a shift in mindset that alters priorities, a decision made in silence that later reverberates throughout family life, a small reconciliation that transforms the dynamics of an entire household. This kind of impact is precisely what most attracts the attention of scholars of popular religiosity and those who follow pilgrimages. The journey of transformation is not so much a spectacle, but a labor of ingenuity in people's hearts. There are repeated testimonies of discrete conversions, of people who rediscovered prayer, of families who resumed blessing rituals, and of communities that began to organize works of mercy with greater intensity, signs that, though simple, are powerful indicators of real change. Therefore, when discussing the 7 unrevealed messages, we must be sensitive to distinguishing between the hidden truth that calls for conversion and hasty interpretations that seek sensationalism. Not all information circulating is a definitive revelation. There are layers of interpretation, historical context, cultural influences, and even language issues that shape how a request is understood. This is where the prudence of pastors, the research of communities, and the critical eye of researchers dedicated to studying religious phenomena come into play. When they claim that something works, they are not talking about easy miracles, but about practices that, combined with time, produce fruits such as inner peace, coherent decision-making, and a greater sense of purpose. It's also worth noting that the seriousness of this topic has gained attention, because many who have come to Medjugorje report lasting changes, not just fleeting emotional experiences, but lifestyle transformations. The spiritual fruition mentioned by pilgrims translates into repeated practices. Daily prayer that ceases to be a ritual and becomes an encounter. Fasting that purifies habits and not just the stomach. Silence that reveals previously hidden inner truths. This sum of small actions generates an impact that goes beyond the individual and spreads to families, parishes, and friendship networks, creating a multiplier effect whose reach is not always measured in numbers, but in quality of life and clarity of purpose. In the analysis of scholars and spiritual leaders, there's also an important psychological dimension. Receiving a calling, however discreet, affects identity and responsibility. Decisions that previously seemed trivial, such as choosing to forgive, prioritize family time, or reduce digital consumption, begin to be seen in a different light. This reallocation of priorities alters mindsets and opens space for a new personal narrative, a kind of internal rewriting that transforms automatic reactions into conscious responses. And these changes, when consistent, can undo old tensions and bring about unexpected reconciliations, which explains why so many reports of a return to family peace appear among the testimonies of those who claim to have heeded the messages. Finally, there is a community component that cannot be ignored. The messages, even when not fully disseminated, encourage collective practices, prayers, vigils, prayer groups that experience a distinct cohesion, a sense of shared mission. These communal fruits are important because they legitimize the experience as something beyond mere subjective. When multiple people report similar benefits, it increases the practical credibility of the messages and sparks curiosity in researchers, pastors, and other believers. It is this intersection of personal experience, study, and collective testimony that gives weight to the unrevealed messages and justifies our taking them seriously, without naivete, but also without cold skepticism. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. Understanding the historical, sociocultural, and spiritual circumstances that produced this call is essential to assessing its scope and veracity. And that's precisely what we'll explore next, revealing the behind-the-scenes story of the first apparitions, the faces of those who heard, and the practical implications that arose from that moment. Comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When we speak of echoes of conversion, we're not just using a poetic expression. We're describing a discrete and cumulative process by which a message gently planted in the heart ends up transforming the choices, mindset, and, consequently, the practical life of those who receive it. Mary, in the messages recorded by those who heard her, doesn't act like an announcer who holds up posters in public squares. She acts as someone whispering behind the scenes of the soul, working patiently, inviting us to reconsider decisions, change habits, and adopt a posture of loving vigilance. This is the fundamental difference between an apocalyptic warning, which frightens and paralyzes, and an invitation to conversion, which enlightens and mobilizes. The former seeks to immediately attract attention. The latter seeks to renew the inner self, shift priorities, and produce lasting fruits. The echo image is perfect because an echo doesn't impose, repeat, or replicate the original voice identically. It returns a resonance that, over time, changes the soundscape. Likewise, messages act like a resonance that, when received, provokes subtle transformations: a renewed prayer, a word of forgiveness, a decision to reduce consumption of useless information. These changes are the foundation of true transformation. They reorganize mindsets and thus impact relationships, professional choices, and even the way a person faces their problems. The impact isn't always spectacular, but it's real. Small choices add up and reshape trajectories. Asking, what does it mean to prepare the heart in secret, is essential. Preparing the heart in secret is recognizing that the main battle is often internal. It is in the daily silence, away from the spotlight, that old wounds find space to heal, and that old, almost automatic reactions are replaced by conscious responses. It is not an inaccessible mystical script, but a practice of presence. Less distraction, more attention to prayer. Less reactivity, more choice. Less external noise, more internal listening. This quietly transformative preparation alters the way a person decides. For example, to prioritize reconciliation over resentment, or to dedicate time to blessing their home instead of letting it be filled with haste and superficiality. And here comes the hidden truth that often goes unnoticed. Conversion is not just an event, it is a journey. Those who experience this journey realize that small changes in attitude have a very high spiritual return rate. A well-placed fast can clarify decisions. A daily moment of silence can reveal a word to be spoken. A repeated act of charity can reorganize a routine and create new meanings. This explains why so many pilgrims and scholars point to the importance of repeated practices. They generate fruition, accumulating spiritual capital that, when invested in relationships and actions, bears fruit. There's another aspect worth mentioning. These messages and echoes of conversion operate both personally and communally. When an individual changes, they affect the microclimate of their family. When several people change, the effect escalates to entire communities that resume collective practices, prayer groups that multiply, care networks that emerge from simple initiatives. This multiplier effect is one of the practical signs that we are not dealing with mere pretty ideas, but with real impact. And it is also what attracts the attention of researchers, who try to understand behind the scenes how these transformations are consolidated without great spectacle, almost like a handmade work of inner restoration. However, we cannot lose sight of the fact that discernment is part of the journey. Identifying what is the fruit of a sincere calling and what is an emotional reaction requires maturity and often guidance. Therefore, when looking at the 7 unrevealed messages, we need to consider context, testimonies, and the lifestyle that results from these guidance. When several people in different contexts report similar changes: more peace at home, more meaningful decisions, previously unthinkable reconciliations, this points to a pattern that deserves study and respect. Try to imagine, for a moment, the practical impact: a home where meals once again become a time for gathering, not just consumption. A community that finds new paths to charity. People who rediscover the habit of praying, not out of obligation, but out of heartfelt need. This is the landscape that these messages, when deeply accepted, help to cultivate. It's a subtle, yet profound, transformation that reveals itself in everyday decisions and the quality of relationships. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, and in doing so, we'll illuminate how each of the messages acts as a turning point in the personal and collective journey, generating revelations that, little by little, become practical and tangible fruits. Comment below, I'm on this journey, too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When we look closely at the first 3 messages, we realize that they act as initial portals to transformation. They are invitations to enter an inner process that alters mindset, decisions, and the way one experiences one's journey. The first message, often translated as a call to repentance, arrives not with a punitive tone but with tenderness, as if reminding us that there is always a way back. Repentance here means recovering honesty with oneself, recognizing where we failed, asking for forgiveness, and making room for a new approach to life. It's not a scientific confession, it's a human gesture that cleans the lens through which we see the world. A practical example you can try today is simple and straightforward. Set aside 5 minutes at the end of the day for an examination of conscience. Silently, recall 2 moments during the day when you could have chosen differently and ask, in a brief prayer, for guidance to change those attitudes tomorrow. This small exercise is already an act of transformation because it alters the course of future decisions. The second message emphasizes reformed prayer, not a longer imposed prayer, but a more authentic prayer that moves away from the automatic and becomes a meeting again. It is an invitation for religious expression to become nourishment for the soul and not just a cultural habit. Reformed prayer renews priorities and rearranges the inner agenda. Where there was once haste, there is now presence. Where there was distraction, listening is born. To experience this concretely, I propose a practical and accessible action. Choose 3 clear intentions before praying, for example, family, clarity in a decision, and a request for forgiveness. As you pray, speak sincerely about these 3 things, without rushing, for 5 to 10 minutes. If you wish, write your intentions on a piece of paper beforehand and read them aloud. The act of naming them makes the prayer more concrete and transforms your mindset. The third message focuses on inner silence. In a time dominated by noise, this message is almost revolutionary. It asks us to learn to hear what lies beneath the anxiety and informational noise. Silence is not total absence, but rather a willingness to perceive the hidden truth that pulses. In the heart, the impact of this practice is profound because silence creates space for wiser decisions, for a less emotional reading of reality, and for an interiority capable of sustaining us when external storms arrive. A practical and immediate action you can try today is a short digital fast. Choose a time of your diet, could be during a meal or upon waking, and turn off notifications. Close social media and dedicate that time solely to breathing, short spiritual reading, or simply contemplation. This 1 minute, repeatedly dedicated, builds a bridge between intention and habit, and gradually alters the way we react to external stimuli. When these 3 messages work together, a Petzi's reformed prayer and inner silence, the effect isn't instantaneous like a script change, but cumulative, a behind-the-scenes effort that gradually rewrites your personal narrative. You begin to make less impulsive decisions, more aligned with purpose. Your mindset shifts from the immediate to the lasting. Priorities shift according to a criterion of meaning rather than mere comfort. This is where practical revelations emerge. A shift in attitude toward consumption, a new value placed on family time, a more generous attitude toward the suffering of others. These small, repeated gestures produce an impact and gradually build spiritual capital that manifests itself in tangible results: greater calm, reconciliation, professional choices that make sense. It's also important to recognize the role of the community in this process. When a person experiences this discrete conversion, their decisions affect the microclimate around them. When several people accept the call, the effect escalates and transforms entire environments. This is a strategic dimension of the messages. They are not just individual guidance, but seeds that, planted in community soil, germinate into concrete initiatives of care and service. Therefore, by practicing the small exercises I've suggested: examination of conscience, intentional prayer, digital fasting, you not only work on your personal transformation, but contribute to a collective impact that can redefine routines, priorities, and life projects. There is, of course, a need for discernment. Not every strong emotion is a sign of revelation. Not every feeling of restlessness should be taken as a definitive voice. Part of spiritual maturity is learning to differentiate fleeting enthusiasm from change that is sustained over time, observing fruits, seeking guidance from those with experience, and evaluating how decisions made impact relationships are essential practices to avoid confusing sensitivity with verdict. Hidden truth, when true, appears repeatedly in different contexts and produces coherence in life. This is what scholars and pastors have called a sign of truthfulness. Consistency in fruits. As you integrate these first steps into your daily life, you begin to see a new narrative taking shape that replaces reactivity with conscious response, that converts habit into purpose, and that transforms small decisions into a life script. And, at the same time, the journey reveals previously invisible behind-the-scenes details, motives, wounds, resistance, and also possibilities. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. Explore how each of the following messages acts as a practical turning point and discover real examples of change that demonstrate the effectiveness of this conversion path. Comment below. This resonates with me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. The following 3 messages strike a different tone. They move beyond speaking only of the heart and begin to expand into the realm of family, community, and works of mercy. It's as if, after healing the inner self and strengthening personal prayer, the invitation expands to the next natural step, allowing transformation to also reach those who walk alongside us. This is where the beauty of a faith emerges that doesn't close in on itself, but overflows into concrete actions, generating a visible impact on collective life. The 4th message is a direct call to the family. It reminds us that the home is the first space of conversion, the first altar where decisions take shape. It is within the home that we learn forgiveness, respect, and mutual care. When a family chooses to unite in prayer, even for a few minutes, something powerful happens. Imagine your family responding to this. Instead of everyone isolated behind screens, there is a brief but sincere moment in which everyone shares intentions, gratitude, and even tears. This simple change already alters the domestic atmosphere, creating a space of trust and peace. It's not a theatrical gesture. It's the decision to consecrate routine to a greater purpose. The 5th message broadens the horizons of community. It reminds us that cultivating peace within 4 walls is not enough. This peace must overflow and become a bridge to neighbors, friends, and colleagues. When we speak of community, we are not only talking about religious structures, but about the entire network of relationships where care can flourish. Works of mercy are not just large social projects, they are also small, everyday gestures that ease the burden of others. A plate of food offered, an unexpected visit to someone who feels forgotten. A word of encouragement in the midst of pain. These are signs that the heart has been prepared to see beyond itself. Community transformation is born from these choices that seem small but change destinies. The sixth message comes as a reminder of collective responsibility. It calls for more concrete and organized works of mercy, as if it were the practical consolidation of what has already begun to germinate. When someone goes a step further and invites others to participate in a charitable act, the flame multiplies. Think of a group of people who decide, once a month, to prepare food baskets for families in need. At first, it seems like just a one-off initiative, but over time it becomes a network of solidarity that mobilizes the resources, talents, and time of many. And most surprisingly, those who help are also transformed. By giving, one discovers new strengths, new meanings, and a joy that cannot be expressed in words. This is the invisible effect of the messages, creating bonds that previously didn't exist, and revealing that true spirituality always expresses itself in action. To illustrate the impact of these messages, I recall a testimony that could be from any ordinary community. A family constantly fighting decided to heed the simple call to pray together before meals. At first it was mechanical, almost forced, but over time, the words began to touch wounds, creating silence and respect. A son who hadn't spoken to his father in months, after one of these prayers, found courage and said just one sentence, "I want to start over." This gesture paved the way for reconciliation. At the same time, the mother of the same family joined a small charity group, and from there, a support network was born that today supports dozens of people in vulnerable situations. This is a portrait of the signs of community transformation, an echo that begins intimately but reverberates throughout the collective. These three messages, when lived together, create a new mindset. It's no longer about simply correcting personal flaws, but about expanding conversion into a space that directly impacts how we live in society. It's an invitation to rebuild homes, to foster solidarity in the neighborhood, to rediscover the value of being present in the lives of others. It's as if spirituality ceases to be merely vertical, between the individual and God, and becomes horizontal as well, building bridges between people. It's at this point that the journey begins to show its power, because it ceases to be merely theoretical and becomes an embodied reality, bearing tangible fruits. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the seventh message presents itself as the climax of this process. It unites the previous ones and presents us with a call of urgency and hope that cannot be ignored. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. The seventh message appears as the knot that ties together everything we've seen. It's not just a standalone request, but a practical, yet consoling call, an invitation that blends urgency and hope in an almost paradoxical way. While the first messages worked within adjusted mentalities and reorganized daily decisions, and the intermediate messages expanded this work to families and communities through works of mercy, the seventh message functions as a synthesis that calls not only for continuity but also for readiness, not an apocalyptic readiness built on fear, but a serene readiness shaped by inner transformation and the practice of love. It is at this point that the hidden truth reveals its most luminous face. The call is not solely to alarm, but to prepare in a concrete way, with a real impact on each person's life. The tone of this message combines warning and consolation, pointing to challenges that may require courageous decisions while also promising spiritual support to face them. In other words, there is a sense of urgency. Act now. Adjust priorities, strengthen bonds, but this urgency is accompanied by a promise. We are not left alone on this journey. This dynamic duo transforms the way we interpret signs. The warning is not a mere omen, it is an incentive for a conversion that bears tangible fruit. Imagine a farmer who receives a warning about a possible drought. The sensible reaction is not panic, but rather to care for the land wisely, store water, and strengthen the crops. Likewise, the seventh message calls for practical and hopeful attitudes that increase spiritual and community resilience. On a practical level, this translates into decisions that align time, actions, and priorities with a greater purpose. It could be the decision to establish family prayer times that are truly adhered to establish a brief personal spiritual retreat, to create routines for visiting those who are alone, or to organize small support groups in the parish. These measures may seem simple, but when combined, they produce a profound impact. They create a safety net, a mentality of service, a standard of living that's different from the immediate. And behind these actions, there's always an internal transformation, less fear, more clarity, less reactivity, more conscious response that changes not only behavior, but also the horizon of meaning for each person involved. To make all this more concrete, I recall a striking testimony. In a small town, a couple who had been suffering from economic uncertainty and family conflicts were touched by the sequence of messages. First, they practiced repentance and reorganized their prayer time. Then, they began serving in local actions. Finally, upon receiving the call of the seventh message, they decided to mobilize neighbors for a simple project to help the elderly. On the streets, what began as a practical gesture became a community movement. And, most importantly, the family who led the initiative found peace and purpose where before they had felt worn out. This is the kind of impact that can't be measured in numbers alone. It changes mindsets, reorients decisions, and produces a living testimony of transformation. The seventh message also requires discernment, because its call to readiness can be misinterpreted as a call to sensationalism. This is where the behind-the-scenes aspects of faith pastoral guidance, community accompaniment, critical study become essential. A true message bears consistent fruit, lasting peace, lasting reconciliations, decisions that make sense over time. When the effect is merely emotional and fleeting, it's a sign that there hasn't been true integration. Therefore, spiritual maturity requires careful observation, verifying whether the decisions made based on the call produce coherence in life, whether they bring about concrete changes, and whether they strengthen bonds of love and service. There is also a dimension of hope that cannot be underestimated. The seventh message does not seek to paralyze. It seeks to give courage. It points to a horizon of possible restoration, not through isolated human merits, but through a transformation that arises when simple choices become routine. The promise that accompanies the call is, in essence, a guarantee that, by responding with humility and persistence, the path of conversion reveals itself not as a loss, but as a gain. A gain in meaning, in communion, in clarity of decision-making, and in an impact that transcends the individual and reaches families and neighborhoods. This hope is a driving force. It moves the will, guides priorities, and fuels the perseverance necessary for the journey to bear fruit. By considering the seventh message as a culmination, we realize that it doesn't require spectacular maneuvers. It demands fidelity. Fidelity in small, repeated practices. Fidelity in sharing resources and time. Fidelity in continuing to listen and pray. And it is precisely this fidelity, cultivated day after day, that builds the spiritual and social resilience that the messages proclaim. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, exploring how, in practice, to articulate these decisions in our daily lives, from routine adjustments to concrete steps to create networks of care, and how to measure whether the fruit is being produced in real life. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. When we talk about signs and fruits, we're not looking for spectacular miracles that fall like rain all at once, but rather small confirmations that emerge in everyday life and, over time, develop a pattern of transformation. Many pilgrims report precisely this: a gradual increase in peace in the heart that doesn't disappear after an emotional moment, discreet reconciliations that resurrect relationships previously marked by resentment, silent conversions where someone returns to prayer naturally and not out of obligation. These signs often manifest themselves in concrete decisions, different choices about how to use time, preferring family time to compulsive entertainment, prioritizing listening over immediate reaction. And it is precisely this shift in mindset that reveals something is working. There are visible signs, such as the resumption of home blessing rituals, the organization of small acts of solidarity in the neighborhood, or the emergence of support groups that previously didn't exist. And there are intimate, internal signs, such as a persistent calm in the midst of crisis, greater clarity in making difficult decisions, and a growing willingness to serve without seeking recognition. One of the most reliable criteria for recognizing fruit is durability. If a prayer practice or an act of mercy becomes a habit, if it withstands time and difficulties, it's a sign that the change has taken hold. Another criterion is the coherence between words and actions. When faith stops being just talk and begins to shape daily choices, we understand its effectiveness. Careful observers also note the breadth of the impact. A decision made by someone that positively affects family dynamics, for example, and is replicated by neighbors or friends, indicates that it is not an isolated phenomenon, but a growing community effect. Informal studies of communities and accounts from pilgrims also show that fruit is often accompanied by humility and patience, not pride or spectacle. In that true verification comes when the person is able to sustain the change without needing external validation. There are practical signs you can observe now: fewer open arguments and more moments of dialogue, small reconciliations that begin with simple apologies, a renewed interest in readings that nourish the soul rather than empty content, and acts of generosity that arise spontaneously, such as sharing food, time, or listening to those in need. Another sign is the quality of decision-making. We begin to make less impulsive choices and more aligned with lasting values. This is transforming mindset into action. In community settings, the fruits appear as organized aid initiatives, the creation of support networks, and the flourishing of prayer and sharing events that were previously not a priority. These movements don't need to be grandiose to be meaningful. They are often composed of small pathways of care that, together, realign the social life of a community. It's also important to understand the psychological dimension of this fruit. Discrete conversion tends to reduce chronic anxiety, increase emotional resilience, and foster a sense of purpose that endures setbacks. People who report having embraced the messages often describe a shift in their perspective on suffering. It ceases to be merely a problem and becomes an opportunity for growth in the exercise of charity. This shift in perspective isn't magical. It's the result of repeated decisions that reprogram emotional and cognitive habits. Furthermore, when the fruits are genuine, there are practical consequences in terms of commitment to the common good. More volunteering, more attention to the needs of the vulnerable, more educational and spiritual initiatives that are sustained over time. Discerning true signs requires time and care. Authentic fruits persist even when emotions fluctuate. They are tested by daily life and do not disappear in the face of difficulties. Therefore, those who follow these processes responsibly pass as spiritual guides, and scholars insist on observing patterns and resisting hasty conclusions. An isolated testimony is impressive, but repeated testimony in different contexts lends credibility, and it is precisely this combination, personal accounts, demonstrable habit changes, and a community echo of good practices, that helps us recognize that the messages are having a real impact. By learning to identify these signs, you also learn to measure your own progress. Notice if there's more peace in conversations, if previously impulsive decisions now take into account the good of others, if there are small reconciliations in the family, if prayer gains depth, and if charity stops being occasional and becomes routine. These signs, taken together, form a practical map for evaluating the effectiveness of the journey of conversion. They show that the hidden truth promised by the messages isn't just words, but translates into concrete impact. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, understanding how to transform these signs into sustainable practices, how to consolidate spiritual and communal habits that withstand the test of time and produce lasting fruits, and that's what we'll explore next. Comment: this makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. And, so that transformation doesn't remain just an idea, I'm going to propose a 7-day itinerary designed for those who want to respond to the messages with concrete actions. A simple, low-friction plan that prioritizes small, repeatable decisions capable of producing a real impact on mindset and personal journey. On the first day, begin with practical repentance. Set aside 10 minutes in the evening for a sincere examination of conscience. It doesn't have to be liturgical. Simply sit in silence, identify 2 attitudes from the day you'd like to change, and quietly ask for forgiveness. Writing these flaws down on paper helps you get them out of your head and transform intention into concrete decisions. This initial gesture acts as a kind of diagnosis of the heart's inner workings, bringing to light hidden truths that demand attention. On the second day, focus on reformed prayer. Choose 3 real intentions, for example, for your family, for an important decision, or for someone in need, and pray for 10 minutes, speaking frankly. If you like, read a short psalm or an inspirational reading beforehand to shape your prayer. The goal is not quantity, but quality, to adjust the mindset of prayer from formality to encounter. On the third day, experiment with practical inner silence. Establish an hour without notifications, without social media, just breathing and spiritual reading or contemplation. This short digital fast is a laboratory for understanding how noise affects your decisions. With each repetition, you gain clarity and find space for subtle revelations. On the fourth day, turn to your family with a simple and effective gesture. Propose a meal without appliances and a brief prayer of gratitude. If possible, ask each person to share something they are grateful for. This routine habit, when repeated, has the potential to change domestic dynamics. It reduces tension, increases empathy, and creates an environment conducive to reconciliation. On the fifth day, practice a small and accessible work of mercy. Could be donating something you no longer use, visiting an elderly neighbor, or offering time to listen to someone in need. These small decisions of service have a multiplier effect. The impact is both external and internal, because by taking action, you align behavior and intention, transforming values into practice. On the sixth day, make a public and restorative gesture of repentance. Apologize to someone you hurt or write a letter of reconciliation. It doesn't have to be long, just sincere. This action has the power to restore relationships and shift a mindset of pride to one of responsibility. On the seventh day, consolidate, celebrate what was planted. Take a moment of gratitude. Review the notes you made during the week, and identify 3 perceived changes, no matter how small, and note how they affected your decisions and mood. This closure isn't an endpoint. It's a marker of progress that helps maintain the routine and transform habit into fidelity. Over the course of these 7 days, notice the small revelations that emerge: a lasting sense of peace, a calmer decision, a conversation that flows differently. These signs are the barometer of real impact. Don't expect a dramatic shift overnight. True change often reveals itself through the sum of simple, repeated acts that reprogram emotional and cognitive habits. The desired transformation here is less spectacular and more effective, shaping your mindset so that your decisions are once again guided by purpose, not impulse. There's also a community aspect worth remembering. Share the experience with someone you trust, without theatrics, simply as a testimony. When 2 or 3 people adopt the same rhythm, the effect scales, and what was once a personal practice becomes the seed of collective change. Behind the scenes of this journey, you'll realize that the work is not only intimate, but also social. Small actions create networks of care that support those in need and yield unexpected results. Finally, keep a brief journal of these 7 days. 1 line a day is enough, so you can later compare and identify patterns. This record will be a valuable tool for discerning what is a fleeting emotion and what is a lasting transformation. The metric isn't quantity, but consistency. If the practices persist and your life shows signs of greater peace, reconciliation, and more aligned decisions, then the response is effective. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, exploring how to consolidate these practices over time, how to scale charitable actions, and how to practically measure the fruits that emerge in your community and in your home. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, and I do so by inviting you to take on a practical challenge that doesn't require heroism, but rather courage for small, repeated decisions. A 7-day invitation to listen, test, and respond to the messages concretely. Transforming intention into action and creating a real path of inner and communal conversion. Begin by accepting that true transformation doesn't usually happen through grand gestures, but through renewed habits. Therefore, the challenge proposes modest steps, designed to fit into your routine and produce a lasting impact on your mindset and decisions. Imagine a week in which each day brings a gesture that nourishes faith, cleanses the backstage of your heart, and bears visible fruit. Days that, accumulated, reveal a new emotional and spiritual landscape. This is the purpose of the challenge: to offer an action plan that allows you to see, in practice, whether the messages bring about real change, more peace, more coherence, more service, and not just fleeting emotion. To inspire, I want to tell a short story that illustrates the power of these small steps. I met a couple who lived a tiring routine, full of demands and little listening. They started timidly, a 5-minute practice of self-examination in bed before bed, a joint prayer on Sunday morning, turning off their cell phones during dinner. It wasn't anything media-focused, it was a reconfiguration of habits. 3 months in, their teenage daughter asked to participate in a volunteer activity proposed by a neighbor. The father, who had previously ignored his wife's signs of exhaustion, arranged a meeting to listen without interrupting. There wasn't a spectacular sign, but there was a sequence of small decisions that changed the dynamics of the household. The transformation there wasn't just emotional, it was practical. Different decisions in the face of conflicts, rearranged priorities, and an impact that extended to the neighborhood as the family began participating in community initiatives. This example shows that continuous conversion happens in routine, and that the hidden truth of the messages is revealed precisely in this discreet and persistent way of living. The 7-day challenge I propose is, therefore, a starting map, a magic formula to test whether these practices bear fruit in your life. Each day is an invitation to a simple action, a moment of sincere repentance that opens new possibilities for attitude, a reformed prayer that transforms mindset, a period of silence to listen to what the heart needs, a concrete gesture in favor of family, an act of charity that destabilizes the ego and strengthens community, a reparation that heals bonds, and, finally, a moment of consolidation to evaluate small revelations and plan for continuity. The beauty of this script lies in its scalability. You can start with 5 minutes and expand as you see results. The important thing is that decisions are repeated and conscious, because only then do they create habits and rewrite behavior patterns. By accepting this invitation, you also open space for revelations that aren't necessarily spectacles, but rather lights that illuminate choices, realizing that recurring irritation is a sign of an untreated wound, that a worn-out relationship calls for a gesture of humility, that disorderly consumption steals time and impoverishes life. The journey of conversion transforms the way we evaluate the world and how we make decisions. The hidden truth of the messages emerges when practice corrects misguided prioritizations, and when the impact manifests in more serene relationships, wiser decisions, and a more dedicated presence for the common good. There's also an essential, collective dimension. When many accept the challenge, the effect multiplies. Care networks emerge from individual practices that become shared routines. Small works of mercy transform into local programs. Discrete conversions accumulate a social impact that, though silent, is often robust. That's why the proposal isn't just personal, it's an invitation to participate in a change that involves family, neighbors, and community. And that has the potential to redefine the environment in which we live. The 7-day challenge also functions as a laboratory for transformation. You test hypotheses about what's good for the heart and, by observing the results, adjust your decisions to maximize impact. Discernment remains central to this process. Listening, testing, observing fruits, and asking for guidance when needed. The journey requires a balance between commitment and prudence, between passion and reason, because mature faith needs its feet on the ground. Thus, accepting the challenge is, at the same time, an act of trust and responsibility, trusting that small practices can bear fruit and committing to honestly verifying the effects of these practices in one's own life. Now, if you feel this resonates with you, if you have a desire to experiment and measure the impact on your routine and relationships, accept the challenge as a first real step toward continuous conversion. And, if you'd like, share a word in the comments that sums up your willingness. I'm on this journey too. Comment below, I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining me in this reflection. Your presence matters. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue receiving practical and in-depth content that helps transform your routine and mindset, because the goal here is to provide useful tools, not just pretty ideas. Leave a comment with the phrase "I'm with you" until the end, so I know you were there. I'll read each message, and this also helps me understand what to bring in future videos. If you felt touched, give me a like. It's a simple gesture that shows that this type of content makes a difference and encourages more people to find these guidelines. There's a video here that complements this topic on how to practice digital fasting. Click and stay with me there. Let's follow this journey together, step by step, calmly and honestly.